Welcome back, everyone. The first discussion we'll be having today is on reflexive democracy, ecological transformations, agroecological promises, and public health imperatives. The session will be anchored by Mr. Tikendar Panwar, former Deputy Mayor of Shimla and author of several books. He's a leading critic of the urbanisms and an incredible promoter of urban mobility. You could say that he cycles in the winters of Shimla and summers of Delhi as well. May I request the speakers for the session to please come on stage?
Good morning, everyone. So I just thought I have a presentation, but maybe I don't have enough time to go through everything. Okay, so I'll just start on a sort of personal note. I've been a trustee of ESG since its beginning, and I've been sort of more academically inclined, and I found some common ground for applications talking to Leo and Bhargavi at that time. But from my own research, what sort of inspired me is images like this, lush green tropical rainforests with plenty of tree species and all the other life forms that are there. And that's what I really wanted to do. So just on a personal note, I started working with this network as a PhD student. And I was working at the site in Mudumalai in India. And we had this beautiful network of tropical forest sites across the world, pretty much across the entire tropical region. And we were interested in questions about what really makes these forests click, why there are so many species, what factors maintain diversity of these ecosystems, and so on. So the questions we were interested in were fundamental to ecology of tropical rainforests. So things like understanding what mechanisms maintain high diversity of rainforests. So if you take, like, for example, the site in Ecuador, Yasuni is called, a small patch, like a square kilometer of forest, would have thousands of tree species, more than 1,500, say. That's more than all the tree species north of Mexico for the Northern America. So that's high diversity of tree species. And we know that classical competition models in ecology can't explain such diversity. So that's the kind of questions I've been interested in, and we have sort of worked on these kind of matters. And our understanding that we have gained is really interesting and fundamental. But even as we gain all this knowledge about rainforests, the thing that doesn't change, even despite all this knowledge, the stuff that doesn't change is the destruction of rainforests, is the destruction of forests across the globe. So this is a forest loss map for 2000 and 2012. And you see that we are continuously losing forests, and the scale of that is evident. 2.3 million square kilometers. That's a very large area. Just for reference, India's land area is about 3.2 million square kilometers. So we're losing a substantial fraction of forests every year, every decade, and so on. And that rate, at least during this time period, actually accelerated, particularly in the tropics. Although it's slowed down now in the more recent decades, it continues to happen. So how do we stop this? Research is not doing it. We understand a lot about the value of tropical forests, but we can't stop this. And here is a measure of how tree cover is distributed across the planet. And I want to draw your attention to India. It's, you see tree cover mainly in the Himalayas and in the Western Ghats and in the eastern part of India, and the rest of it is either climatically not suitable for tree growth, or it's so intensified in terms of agriculture that we have actually lost most of the tree cover. And obviously, there's a lot of tree cover in the tropical regions in Africa and Central and South America and Southeast Asia, but also in the colder regions. All of this can get opened up in the future for exploitation. Yeah, so this hasn't been the same throughout, right? We have seen for a long period of Earth's history, things have been relatively stable and static. And only in the last 300 or 400 years ago or so, things have accelerated a lot. The output per person in terms of product, but also the population size. And that's not a coincidence that as people start exploiting resources and they're able to accumulate capital and move away from subsistence, it can support larger populations, and that sort of accelerates much further. So that enormous rise in global population and the global output of products is not a coincidence. It's so closely sort of tied. So I just wanted to say that at this point in time, the world's population is about 8 billion. It's right here, 2020. But look at the uncertainty in the projections for the future. we don't really know which trajectory we'll take because it depends on so much that we don't fully understand. The kind of choices we're going to make, how resources are going to respond, and so on. So on the right side, I have some measure of how the Earth's capacity, the Earth's productive capacity is currently being used by people. So there are questions like how much of the Earth's productive capacity is actually used by people currently. And that gives us a potential for estimate of how much human beings are interfering in the energy flow through ecosystems. So the more we appropriate, the less there is available for other organisms, for ecosystems to do their process. So that's an important thing. And so on the left side is that potential vegetation or the potential productivity of land if left unaltered. And alterations typically reduce productivity, as we see there. And the question is how much of it is being affected by human activities. That's something that we should really know. In the last 100 years that we have data to show how much of the productive capacity of the Earth is being harnessed and appropriated by human beings, it's almost doubled. So that may not sound like a lot if you know that the population of the Earth has grown like 4-fold during that time. Economic output has grown 17-fold, but the appropriation of the primary biomass or productivity has just doubled. It's because of greater efficiencies and so on. So the efficiency with which we use resources is the critical sort of question. So I just want to show you this about planetary boundaries. And I spoke about the appropriation of primary productivity of the terrestrial land surface. And the red wedges actually show, the red marks actually show planetary boundaries being breached, at least in 2 or 3 cases. One is biodiversity loss. The other one is the nitrogen cycling. And in climate change also we're getting pretty close. And so these are planetary boundaries because the planet we live in a finite Earth and the resources are finite. And then therefore our appropriation of these resources will eventually reach a physical limit. And so we have already breached certain boundaries and biodiversity loss is quite high. And that's primarily to do with how the natural ecosystems have been modified by human appropriation of productivity. So we talk really about economic growth. Most of the time, policymakers and politicians are telling us about how economies should keep growing, and that's the only way to solve the problem of human development. And in part, that is actually true, that throughout history, we have seen that mean per capita growth is associated with things like consumption of energy and resources of various kinds. And what is clearly evident is that we have already peaked the resource extraction sometime in the past. So the recession that sort of started in 2008, which has not really ended, it's getting continued because the resources that are there have been exploited to such an extent that any further exploitation is coming at a greater cost. So that's something that we need to keep in mind, that GDP growth cannot be sustained endlessly because of resource limitations. So I think we have seen enough of sustainable development goals being presented as the benchmark on which we have to really discuss the future. And for whatever it's worth, I think it's useful to have targets. When we talk about sustainability and development, it can't be an open-ended thing. So I like to present this, and one of the things that we have understood moving on from the Millennium Development Goals to this SDGs is that poverty and underdevelopment are not the cause of environmental destruction, but actually the consequence of that. And so when we understand that the poverty and underdevelopment and the solutions for those lie in maintaining a planet that is ecologically sound, then I think we are getting somewhere in trying to solve these problems. So there is an internal contradiction, many people have pointed this out, between sustainable consumption and production, and then maintaining positive growth rates of GDP to be able to match the targets for developing human economies, human development. So if you look at these goals, for example, goal 1 is to ensure sustainable consumption and production. And so by 2030, we have to achieve sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources. That's a clear goal. But there's also a goal that says sustained per capita economic growth rate in accordance with national circumstances, 7% at least for least developed countries. And this means that we have to keep growing in order to develop, but also achieve sustainable use of resources at the same time. Can we actually do that, right? Is it possible to, and so these goals were actually introduced because the Millennium Development Goals had articulated that reducing poverty and reducing, hunger and all that, but they didn't say how to do that. And these goals of economic growth were meant to address that theoretical gap. So the big question, so based on some analysis, it appears that we need to sustain about 3% annual GDP, if you look at it in current sort of terms, through 2030 in order to, achieve the development targets. But is that also sustainable? Can that kind of growth rate also lead to sustainable use of natural resources? We really need to address that. So I'll quickly sort of give a summary of what that really means, that whether this internal contradiction can be recognized or the tension can be resolved. So one way to address that or assess that is to look at something called as a material footprint. That is the total resources consumed by people. And material footprint per GDP is an indicator of resource use efficiency. So how much materials you consume as you enhance your GDP per year or something. And this is the objective that is used to reconcile the production versus resource use efficiency and to decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. So that's the Sustainable Development Goal target tries to capture that. So I'll just quickly summarize whether this is actually possible or not from what analysis that we see. So there have been some studies on what would be appropriate material footprint that can be sustained. And so there's one study that says maybe 50 billion tons per year as a planetary boundary for material footprint. And that works out about per capita limit of 8 tons per year per person. So, but if you look at the actual data, that material footprint actually been rising, and it was about 87 billion tons in 2015. So that's mostly accounted for by consumption in high-income countries where the per capita rates are very high. So we can't really match that 50. Whatever assessment that is, you may disagree, but it's some kind of a benchmark against which you can test the trends that are happening. So if you look at what has happened in the 1982 to 2002, the material footprint grew by 1.7%, 1.78% per year, but the GDP grew by 2.9%. So GDP is growing faster than the material footprint, so there's a decoupling of 1.1% or something. But if you look at the more recent decade, there's a material footprint is growing by 3.85% and GDP only by 2.93%. So therefore, the material efficiency of the world economy has actually been worsening. So that's not a good thing. So if those trends continue, we're going to have a material footprint of 167 billion tons per year by 2030. That's way above, 3 times above the 50 billion tons that has been computed to be sustainable. So that's kind of bad news. And if we have to reduce it, we have to decouple GDP growth from material footprint. And the decoupling has to be fairly substantial. And the decoupling rates of 3.01 to 6.88% has been computed. 3.01 is the basic minimum needed to decrease the footprint by even a small amount. But 6.88 would decouple it and allow that. And if you want to decouple the material footprint to this extent, we need resource use efficiencies that are 3 or 6 times greater than anything that has ever been achieved in history. So that looks like really difficult. And even if you do that, computations show that resource use efficiencies usually drop off and then stop because there are physical and thermodynamic limits to it. And then again, the material footprint will start to rise if GDP rises. So it's not possible to really continuously increase GDP and ensure that development happens without really affecting the material footprint. So that's pretty clear that we can't simply keep growing on a finite planet. But all is not so gloomy. There are some other scenarios that have been analyzed and that can potentially lead to more sustainable outcomes. Like I've listed one scenario here where you have to decide basically where and how production occurs. That's important. Those are important decisions like ESG kind of organizations have worked with. Where do you do certain kinds of development or production? So if you take a scenario like this, for example, you have if you design scenarios which lead to no loss of habitat and sufficient protected areas, sustainable fisheries, and then keeping greenhouse gas emissions to this kind of level. And if you take that scenario, it involves achieving the fourth objective, for example, entails that by 2050, your total production of energy, only 13% of it will come from fossil fuels, 54% from energy supply coming from renewable resources, and 33% from nuclear. Only under those circumstances will you will you achieve the fourth objective. So these are important things that we need to consider at a global scale, that whether we can actually achieve this. And if you look at what they've agreed upon in Paris, is to keep the temperature below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. They've agreed to that, but their emission reduction agreements cannot match that. It's going to be much greater than that. And then most of the emission reduction scenarios look at this particular aspect called bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. So we need to replace most of the energy sources, fossil fuel sources, with renewable energy, but also actively take out carbon from the atmosphere. The technologies that are needed to remove carbon, actually take out carbon from the atmosphere. Without that, most of the scenarios will never be able to match what we are actually seeing now. So the question is, can we really scale down economic activity? It's fairly clear that GDP cannot keep growing in the conventional sense, that we need to have some kind of scaling down that is primarily to reduce material and energy, material throughput and energy demand, and not necessarily reduce GDP per se, but the consumption. And there are various ways in which you can do this, is to redistribute existing income, investing in social services, wage distribution, and so on, at least starting from the high-income countries, but global plans to redistribute things across the globe. And we seriously need to consider things like degrowth and better use of, because it's clear that if the trends continue, our material footprint will not be able to be achieved.
Okay, we have Ms. Jesu Rathinam. She also has a presentation to share as well.
Yeah, thank you. The topic is reimagining. So, what we think as fisher rights, I'm trying to reimagine, and from the movement angle to from where I come, represent. So, the first thing what I wanted to say is the entire narratives of the fisheries, fisher people narratives are not only the fisheries. It is not just the fisheries alone. So, but fishers are restricted to the whole definition everywhere to fisheries alone. Fisheries is just one of the resources of the ocean. So that is the first point. And fishing is a part of, this is our way of life. So that should be understood. It's not catching fish alone. It is not livelihood alone. We are restricted to see that fisher is livelihood. It is fisher's livelihood. It's not just livelihood. It's a way of life. So that we wanted to emphasize. And fisher people, and now we have started again requesting the community, world community, to look at us amphibians. We are not, always we have said, you have the sea, you have the fish there, so restrict with that. So we are talking only of whether fish is declining, fish is improving, or we get the fish to land and sell in the market. So that is what is being spoken of. It's not like that. We are amphibians, we want the land also. Without the land, where do we land the fish? Without the land, where do we live? So the more importance is given to resources in the sea, that is especially only fish. Not like that. We have a broader perspectives to look at. And so that's a historical, traditional rights over land. So the tidal influenced water bodies, forest along the coast, and sea largely called as ocean commons and fisher commons. We would like to say again, insist that fishers were the custodians of the ocean resources. But now it has been in the name of marine spatial planning and other blue economy projects. Everything is, what to say, it is all divided and spaced to give to all industries. And where are the fishers now? So the Western, we just, in civilization, so we have to see that these discourses are there. It is fisheries, model neoliberal adaptations of market economy model had pushed fisheries development policies and driving the production to export-driven production and not for the communities. And so it is mostly export-driven. So what the internal global market has, that will be asked to be produced. So we are also shifting from capture to culture. That is the reason. Even now, earlier only that we were talking of shrimp culture. Dr. Vandana Shiva has written a very good publication and book saying that rape and run when it initially came. But now we are culturing everything. Fish, if tuna has a market, tuna will be cultured. So catcher fisheries is reducing and culture fisheries is increasing. And in the investment in culture, not only along the coastal states, it's all over in all the states of India. So the push is for culture inland and also in the sea as marine culture, mariculture. Now, also we would like to state that the tradition to modern, so that is another thing. I just wanted to think of, yesterday there were reflections about experience versus experts. So we are just doing away with our traditional knowledge of fishing, traditional knowledge of how we fish, when to fish, how to fish. All those is not at all documented and is also not considered. But we are asked to look at all the technical part of it. It is introduced. It was way back in 1960, it was introduced in the name of, by the Norwegian technology, and now we have gone far ahead with technology. So all solutions come only through, is addressed by technology. They try to say, if you don't have fish in the sea, culture it. Why do you want to sustain the fishery resources in the sea? By less pollution, because all are dumped into the sea. Everything, all cities dump their sewage and wastage, everything into the sea, and industries also. So that is a bigger part of it. Blue economy agenda, the blue transition, as we have mentioned, it has all grabbed and occupied the fisher commons. So now seashore, coastlands has converted to be coastal economic zones such as port, land, prosperity, tourism, name everything along the coast. There are more than 13 components nearly. It's a blue economic policy is in the draft stage. It came in the 2020. But just the policy is there, but all the ministries have started announcing and setting aside budgets. What are all the components in the blue economy? Every component, each and every component is having a budget component. Tourism, name tourism, ports, industrial development, and now it has to be linked to the marine fisheries, National Marine Fisheries Bill also, which is still in the bill stage. But restrictions of fishing up to 12 nautical miles, then from 12 to 200 it is special economic zone. The word itself is special economic zone. So we have to see that everything is linked to economy. Economy of what? Underground, underwater. Goal itself says, goal 15, SDG goal, it says underwater. Yes, it's a biggest exploitation of underwater resources by deep sea mining. So we have definite ministries coming out with their own regulations, how to extract everything from underwater and above water. So that is how it's going. It's all components of blue economy. So deep sea mining is coming in a very big way, and globally as well as in India. That is the next thing. And blue energy, and then blue foods. So marine conservation and protected area is another area where we see that MPAs, marine protected areas, by the Convention of Biodiversity. The last convention, There were only 10% of the global resources can be converted. Now it is talking of more. It has set aside 30%. So 30 by 30. 30% of the conservation, if it is declared as conservation sites, fishes will be thrown out. Coastal poor will be thrown out. Only industries will be there. Wherever it has been converted to, declared as marine conservation sites, oil rigging, exploration, everything is allowed. But fishes are not allowed to fish. So whom are they saying that, what are they going to conserve? They have started declaring many conservation sites in India. So that means fishers, forest dwellers, forest people along the coast, everything, they will be thrown out. There will be no place to live there. So reclaiming ocean and reimagining our fisher future. First we would like to say the 3 R's of Nancy Fraser. That is redistribution, recognition and representation. We have just expanded it. Those 3 terminologies, what she has said. That was also she told about dimensions of for social justice. So from that we have now in the Conference of Ocean People, these are the things which we focused on, reject all the corporate way of development and climate solutions, false climate solutions coming in the name of geoengineering and the ocean engineering. And so they are not going to give any solutions for the blue economy, for the blue economy proposals they are proposed. And next is recognition. Recognition of the ocean people by the nation states. There are written river valley civilization. There are no ocean valley civilization is documented. But ocean means not only ocean. We are the ocean people. So our civilization should be documented. The traditional historical rights of the communities should be documented. We have raised this question in one of the FAO meeting, and now the FAO talks of only management of resources. So this is definitely a contradiction to what they say. But it needs to be documented, otherwise all from fishes should be thrown out from the commons, coastal commons, land commons, whatever is there. Then restitution of the rights, what we have already lost as our, just I have not, customary has created a debate within the movement itself. So historical, traditional governance. So I would like to insist that. So the governance, the fishers had their own, they still have their own governance mechanisms. There are both undemocratic things are also there, but there are many democratic structures are also there. Wouldn't we build on the democratic thing? The way where we have used the governance structure of fishers is to fight the state. Whenever we have something coming to fight the state, to raise the communities against the state, definitely as movements we have also used. Bringing them together and raise their voice against the states. But so restitution, then also resisting, and then one more thing is redistribution of the resources. Recognition comes to governance, and fishers need space in all the governance structure. They have a good governance, but nationally in all their bodies, they are just not even recognized. Even if when we ask for representation, we are given representation. In any committee, if you look at it, one person from one leader will be from the community, but the committee will consist of 15 people, all bureaucrats, all from different departments, and so we have argued with them. Where is the power versus powerless? The powerless is represented by one person, and all the powerful people within the bureaucracy and they are there. So where will the voice come from, and what will we be able to say in that committees? So representation should be in such a way that our voices can be raised and heard by the other people. So this is how we reimagine. These are the things what ocean commons have to be recognized, and also we should work towards that, recognize the community governance structure, where they can really govern the oceans and coastal commons. Thank you.
Congratulations, ESG. 25 years of good work, clarity of purpose, commitment, and courage. It's been an agenda-setting journey for ESG. Congratulations again. It's also very good to be sharing the room with so many inspiring people. You know, from climate and environment to architecture and governance. There are people here in this room who have inspired generations of others. Thanks for this opportunity, Leo and ESG for this. I am Kshitij. I represent two organizations. One is relatively new, India Biochar and Bioresources Network. This network is working to influence efficient management of bioresources in India, of course, beyond India too, for ecosystem restoration as well as sustainable agriculture. Just to kind of get us to understand the scale of it all, the government of India says that we generate about 1 trillion metric tons of biomass every year. This is after harvest. And most of it is inefficiently used, even burnt in the open. Now, this doesn't even consider natural bioresources. So we are in the process of mapping at the panchayat level bioresources available at in the jurisdiction of one panchayat, at the most decentralized level of governance, what is called the subsidiarity scale of governance. And to our surprise, besides a very nominal understanding of a biodiversity management committee, which hardly works, there is no understanding of bioresource that is generated at the panchayat level each year. It has to be inventorized, it has to be monetized, it has to be managed, and it has to be used sustainably. And this is what we are trying to do through IBBN. There is also this issue of biochar. It was mentioned earlier that there is a need for us to capture carbon from the air and put it back in the soil. For people who have read about climate change, one of the theories of when climate change started accelerating, one of the theories, you may want to have, there are a lot of young people here, you might want to develop your own theory around it. But one theory is when artificial fixing of nitrogen was discovered and mechanisms were invented. So today, we humans capture more nitrogen from the air than nature can on its own. In fact, we fix 3 times more nitrogen than the entire planet can on its own. And we're deploying that nitrogen in all kinds of purposes, from bomb making to fertilizers. Yeah. And there is probably also need as a solution to capture carbon and put it back in the soil. And one method of doing it is what is called a deep decarbonization pathway, and one pathway is biochar. It's compacting carbon and putting it back in the soil. And IBBN emerged out of revitalizing rain-fed agriculture network. So in the next few slides, I will talk more about rain-fed agriculture than IBBN. It's a very unthankful livelihood, farming. It is. And even in the 20th century, when every single policy is market-based, where incentivization and penalization happens through market principles rather than the natural principles that have evolved over time, the same market principles are not being adopted for farming as a livelihood. So, there is something called externality, and the Coase theorem, which talks about positive and negative externality. So if a certain activity is leading to positive externality, that activity has to be incentivized. Now, farming, food production, food security. So food security is probably the most important positive externality. and yet farming is disincentivized. And the rural crisis, the rural distress continues, though the same market principles are being applied for every other sector in the country and in the globe. So you look at all these aspects of economy, and none of it is in the control of farmers themselves. Yeah, so not just that. I mean, look at the picture below, and farmers, I'm not even romanticizing the past. If you read the documents of Albert Howard, for example, he was a botanist who was sent to profile resources in India, natural resources in India, and he stayed back for 27 years because he was so amazed by the sustainable agriculture practices of farmers in this country. And obviously, this is a man who had traveled around the world. And he said, look, the farmers in India can be professors of other farmers in the world. And this is what he said. And he documented all these practices. And from an agricultural practice which reduced emissions, avoided emissions, and also practices in the past in India, and I'm not a nationalist in any stretch of imagination at all. But in the past, there were processes in agriculture which removed carbon from the soil, from the air, and put it in the soil. And from that paradigm, the so-called green revolution, and this is a discussion that we might want to have. A revolution is obviously a definition of a process which happens bottom up. People coming together, processes coming together to create a better world. And the green revolution that we experience is a top-down process. It's rather a green propaganda than a green revolution as such. And so from a very progressive, sustainable agriculture practice that our farmers had, we got into this particular situation where the single largest contributor of greenhouse gases and other processes leading to climate change today is related to land use pattern and agriculture. Agriculture as a contributor to climate change. And my choice of working on agriculture and climate change because there's a negative loop relationship between the two. It's so closely related to food security. That apart, climate change impacts agriculture. Agriculture in its conventional sense impacts climate change. Yeah. For those from Karnataka, I really do not know how many of us are aware that Karnataka after Rajasthan is the second driest state in India. And the CREDA research has said that 24, we've got 31 districts. They did study in 24 of the 31 districts. And they say 16 of the 24 districts in Karnataka are eternally drought prone. And if you look at India itself, because this discussion is about rain-fed agriculture, there is a very uncanny but not surprising overlap between rain-fed areas on one side and poverty, the extent of poverty, and tribal and indigenous communities. They overlap. So this is the social dimension of rain-fed agriculture that we hardly talk about in our policies and programs. And yet, these rain-fed farmers, look at the bottom numbers at the bottom of the slide, 40% of rice, and very diverse range of rice varieties. 89% of millets, 73% cotton, and 88% pulses. They all come from rain-fed areas. And friends, rain-fed farmers use less than 20% of the chemical fertilizers and weedicides and pesticides that irrigated farmers do. So if amongst the farming, of course the farming community itself will have to be treated much more equally, but rain-fed farming and rain-fed farmers will have to be celebrated. A lot more public investment will have to go into the hands and pockets of rain-fed farmers. So, and yet look at the extremely skewed, public support. This is a comparative slide between irrigated farming and 1 year's fertilizer subsidy, which largely goes into irrigated area, is much more than 40 years of watershed development in rain-fed areas. This is the skewed. This continues, and it is not about this particular government. This has been consistently the way it is, and this is about that skewed understanding of public provisioning. We go to the next, and then you can, okay, then you can see this, the fertilizer consumption. It's less than half of fertilizers being used, inorganic fertilizers being used in rain-fed areas. This is also a pie chart of, and that is, the one on the right is particularly illuminating. Public investment in rice and wheat versus coarse wheats, coarse cereals. Hardly anything. Isn't this, in a data-driven economy, in a data-driven society, isn't this enough to talk about the inequalities faced by rain-fed farmers and the injustices that they are being subjected to? And the planetary boundaries were already spoken about, and you can very closely see the association of agriculture with the planetary boundaries. You can see, there are these 9 boundaries, and though we talk a lot about fresh water, thankfully we still haven't crossed the planetary boundaries as far as exploiting or destroying fresh water is concerned. But if you look at these other things like the biosphere integrity, I keep asking questions. I teach in a couple of colleges. I keep asking students if they know how many plant sources are edible. And they say 25, 85,000, plant varieties, or vegetable sources are edible. We eat about 20. And this is the same all over the world. So biosphere integrity, but you also look at biogeochemical flows, especially phosphorus and nitrogen. Where is it being used? So the entire planet is at threat because of the kind of agriculture that is being pushed, though there's good practice happening in rain-fed areas. But I'm particularly concerned about this. This slide talks about where the planet is headed. There was this beautiful map during the first presentation, and that close relationship that we have between the Indian monsoon and the Brazilian rainforest. The clouds that form and are brought all around the world the humidity is formed on the Brazilian rainforest, and there is distant precipitation 13,000 miles away. So what Brazil does will be affecting India, likewise elsewhere. So the entire planet is going off the loop of what is called the glacial interglacial cycle. There is you can see that we are already off that track, and we have to lasso it back into the loop. We have to pull it back into the loop to ensure that it gets back into the normal loop. Otherwise, there is a threat, and this is one of the reasons why scientists are alarmed. Scientists are usually cool and composed, but they are alarmed when they talk about climate change today. We have to get it back. Otherwise, there's something called the hot house Earth phenomenon, where they're saying that the Earth's atmosphere can actually become Venusian, like Venus, because Venus, they have found that it had microorganisms earlier. There's no life now. They can become Venusian. So the planet is at stake. Okay, so our priority is this. We don't want to let go. We can't just talk about the climate and environment. We talk about sustainable agriculture, but it's also about improving farmers' income in a true sense, and make farming a year-long livelihood. And hence, through the revitalizing grain-fed agriculture, especially in Karnataka, we started working with farmers and the government to push for something called Akkadi Salu. Akkadi Salu is a diversity-based ecological farming practice where we have about 22 different kinds of crops in 1 acre of land. And these are the various benefits of it, of Akkadi Salu. These slides will be left here for your reference. We have found it very, very useful, and rain-fed farmers, all the number of farmers that we worked with have stuck to it, which is really good, and we are working in 8 districts. Through farmers' practices on what they do every month, there is a calendar that has been formed for the reference of other people, for other farmers. So what do you do in March? What do you do in April? So Besaya Kalamana, or the Besaya calendar, or Krishi calendar, agriculture calendar. It's amazing the things that they do in the rain-fed farming areas, a lot of which is not even documented in agricultural colleges. This is not taught in agricultural colleges. Is it economic? Is it economical, rather, for farmers? Akkadi salu. This is the expenditure, and every bit of expenditure and income, every expenditure income has been documented. So if there are no extremes of climates locally, there is a possibility of a farmer earning about 1.5 lakh rupees profit per acre of land practicing Akkadi Salu. This is besides the ecosystem services, ecological services, which are all positive externalities, carbon, soil, nutritional security of the family. This is the economics of it. This is the motto. The transformational motto of Akkadi Salu is zero chemical fertilizers, zero chemical weedicide, and zero groundwater. So this is 100% rain water driven, without tapping into the groundwater. And there are some distress irrigation possibilities that were required in South Karnataka, but otherwise it was zero. And thankfully, we had some receptive years in the Karnataka government, and they advocated this because there are a lot of farmers who are MLAs. And in their own constituencies, they said, look, I am an Akkadi farmer. These are the benefits. Why don't you have it? And we are going to support. There are a lot of systemic lacunae for farmers to adopt this. There are no seeds, for example. Yeah, these are things that we're working at, but want to leave this at in a positive note. Akkadi Salu is not new. It's called by different names in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. But then Akkadi, the adoption of it is very, very poor. There is a future for it if systemic support, is involved. And this is what we are working to influence. Thank you.
So, but the fact that we have a long relationship with ESG, that I've come here actually. I've come from Manipur, Imphal, and I am associated with a fishing union, the Loktak Lake, the Fishers Union called the Old Loktak Lake Areas Fishers Union, and I'm one of the advisors to the union. So it's the fishing families union that are there in Loktak. Loktak, one of the largest, freshwater lakes in India. It's about 232 square kilometer. And ESG, Leo and friends and from ESG who have we have worked together to particularly fight against the recent effort of the state to take over the wetland, and they're bringing in tourism, resorts, golf courses, yoga meditation center, motorboats, and I think fairly we have been able to kind of stop it. We have a legal battle going on. At the same time, we have mass mobilization with the union. So fairly we're doing well. But interestingly, new development the last month or so is that the ministry, the union minister, the local, which is a BJP government, and then the BJP government, then they are actually sort of trying to clear a document which is called the Integrated Management Plan, IMP, of all the wetlands. Every wetland in India, there's supposed to be an integrated management plan, and they're trying to clear it. And so tomorrow and day after tomorrow, there is a meeting of the union organized by the ministry in Imphal, called the Regional Conference Workshop on wetlands in the northeastern part of India. And interestingly, in this workshop on wetlands, it's going to begin with Man Ki Baat. So people are supposed to listen to Man Ki Baat in the first session of the workshop. So So that's it. So I mean, of course, we were not invited. Nobody is invited. It's just bureaucrats and some politicians sitting, and they will be talking about wetland conservation. But our struggle, our fight. This is, I think, sorry, this is a visual that Leo has captured in his last visit in December. It's a bird's paradise. It's a lot of birds there. Birds from all over the world. They come and come and visit during November, December, January, that kind of period, 3 months, 4 months. And this is a floating, just to explain what is happening in the background, because it's a break from what I was speaking. There are floating huts there, and actually there is a village called the Champuk Kangpuk Floating Village, and we are closely associated, and this is the only natural floating village in the world. So people, there's 132 households, and they actually live on the floating vegetation. This is one of those, this is a very old dilapidated, but there's also other proper houses there, proper huts there. People live there with their families, and the catch fishers. Of course, the primary thing is fishing. And very powerful, very well-organized unions, I would say, in India, one of those very well-organized. But why it was organized was, of course, in 2011, the government burned down several of them under a Loktak Protection Act, as they call it. It's a state law. And since then, they have very well organized themselves. In fact, now the state, the Loktak Development Authority representing the state cannot even take their motorboats there. They will stop them. In fact, one of the reasons why already cleared project by the Ministry of Shipping on this motorboat project, the Inland Waterway project, has been stopped by them, and of course in the court, through the court too, that the motorboats, so there's a clear fight between the canoes, that you can see the number of canoes that they have here. Men and women, every family will have 2, 3 of them. And they can own it easily, and they can, for using for catching fish or going for markets and so on and so forth. And they have argued that motorboats are not needed, not required, but the government is very happy to give money for motorboats, because motorboats are problematic for the birds. Motorboats are problematic for the aquatic system, the plants there, and motorboats are particularly bad for the nets, fishing nets. So somehow this has been, of course, the court understood that, but at the same time, the people understood. The hundreds of families, not only people living inside Loktak, but also around Loktak, have understood it and have come together, and they have been able to resist against this project, against this inland waterway project. The current struggle, I would say, about conservation and people, and this has been discussed at different forums and on different issues about forest issues, tigers and national parks and so on and so forth, but on wetlands and conservation, and this is where I think one of the key issues that needs to be discussed, not only in this forum today, but also I think about all over India. And I had I was fortunate to meet in the morning a lawyer, Anand Yadnik from Gujarat. In fact, we were discussing about wetlands there in Gujarat and how they have managed to actually stop one of the projects there. And in fact, it may be a precedent to the National Wetlands Rules of 2017, which actually in some way has been able to help the local people in terms of pushing back some of the projects that we are talking about here today also. This is a less used, people have not really understood also, people have not really used also at the same time, but at the same time the state also has not really formed the institution of the State Wetlands Authority all over India. Some states have done it, but also that in terms of implementation on the ground of having the the need to notify the wetlands, which gives the legal status of any wetland. I was checking this morning about Karnataka. Karnataka hasn't, but of course ESG's work on lakes. Wetlands here has, I mean, tremendous, I'm sure it has a tremendous impact on the law that came out in 2017. I think also the one which has the struggle in Gujarat itself. But I find that in other states, the State Wetlands Authority has performed in some of the states, but the notification of wetlands, the notifying wetlands, which actually gives you the legal protection, hasn't really happened across India. And I think that's one of the key issues that needs to be looked at by activists and researchers across. And this is the struggle at the moment now in Manipur. For example, we have been pushing for notification of the wetlands, because and then that gives a teeth. But somehow, I think in the morning, Justice was talking about the culture of adherence. There's a crisis in the culture of adherence. It has not been implemented. And we are arguing in the court also that there's a current court going on, current PIL going on in the Manipur High Court about the need to notify wetlands, notify Loktak, notify and other wetlands, like Karnataka, Manipur, and particularly the valley of Manipur is a city of lakes and full of lakes there, like riverine wetlands. But now you can actually count on your fingers of how many, and it has been encroached, taken over, dried up. And the struggle now is that the hotels industry, tourism industry, and other industries are going to take over these wetlands, and that's where the real struggle in Manipur right now is. So about the fishing community, in fact, this morning, just in our panel, Madam Jesu was talking about the culture and capture fishery. Much of the fisheries, and not only in Manipur, but fisheries across India is more of capture fishery, where you capture fisheries that you do in rivers or in lakes or on oceans. But this has this large population of people who do capture fishery has been neglected. In fact, it is not discussed in many forums also. There is now, of course, a platform that we have developed called the National Platform for Small-Scale Fishery Workers. And mostly looking at, we are trying to look at and support mostly people who do capture fishery and also small-scale fishery, some of the culture fishery, but they are very small tiny in terms of their livelihood activities. And this is an area that is something that needs to be looked at. And Loktak, when we're talking about Loktak, we're particularly only talking about capture fishery, people who do, I would say, something like hunting and gathering in that sense. But this is a fishery that serves like the main protein source, the main fish supplies, whether it's in terms of dried or whether in terms of fresh, of different sizes that comes in the markets, the women markets in Manipur, and slowly what is happening is the policies are actually geared for culture fishery. So there's money for it, there's schemes for it, there are loans for it, but somehow this lacks of population who are dependent on capture fishery are slowly being marginalized. In fact, there is a policy within the integrated management plan for wetlands that these people should be taken off. I mean, that slowly by phases, they should be removed. In fact, which actually shows the intention very clear that these water bodies need to be given away to maybe other, convert into a culture fishery sort of, or to tourism industry and other industries. And these are major concerns that I want to bring it here in today's forum. And thanks to ESG, and we have been working together on this particular issue, on the issue of wetlands, on the issue of lakes, and on the issue of Loktak. And we've been doing this for 5 years now, and I think it's a long battle in which the battle continues. And I'm sure our relationship will continue. And also for those people who are working on fishery, like I met her today, and I think we need to also kind of come together and build alliance, build understanding of how to look at this and how to struggle together. Thank you.
My name is Suprabha. I live in Wayanad, Kerala, and I work in a place that is concerned with tiny plants, which we believe constitute the majority of the rainforest, and some of them include mosses. So we have like 150 different kinds of moss that we grow in our plant center, and this is because mosses alone, I'm told by experts, that contribute something like 30% to the hydrological, gas, etc. cycles of the rainforest. So when we talk about the rainforests of the Western Ghats, we talk about trees and beautiful rain seasons and waters and so on. And the image in your eye will consist also of ferns and the soft greens of the mosses. There are hundreds and hundreds of species of these. So the field of restoration ecology, which is what Leo wanted me to speak about, is about when you're talking about something that's been destroyed and you want to bring it back to something that resembles, you know, of its original or previous state before the various forces of destruction. Our place, we start working with these little ones. You know, other people might start working with major, you know, tigers or elephants or trees, but our belief is that the integrated, the entangled nature of the rainforest consists of a biodiversity that's mind-boggling, and it's actually not taken into account at all. But, you know, I'm going to keep this really short with an invitation that all of you visit Wayanad and you come and drop in at the Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary, and you'll see the most amazing diversity of flora and fauna. But, you know, the point is that restoration ecology has a beautiful side, which is what we do. The beautiful side is growing these lovely plants and then bringing back the forest, and you see this tremendous diversity come back. But it's like saying, you know, can you have sanity if the culture is basically a psychopathic culture? You know, so these are tiny. Can you restore ecology when all our speakers till now have just shown the scale of the onslaught? And meanwhile, those of us who are planting and growing and so on, we have this other thing that is actually destroying the very fabric from which these plants can come back. And then they create conditions whereby other diversity can come. So there's a wonderful feedback loop that goes positive when you're protective of nature, and there's a tremendously negative feedback loop if you go the other way. And you know, if we take this room, the Western Ghats would be sort of where we're all sitting, just that part. And if you take 8 of us off the table, there's only 2 left, actually, you know, who are sustaining the rivers and sustaining the tremendous biome that is there, that is feeding into the, you know, the Deccan Plateau. And then, so what do we mean by restoration? Well, if all these other 8 people are not here and you just leave the place alone, maybe some bugs and some creatures will come in, some plants will grow, then some, you know, little cycle of mist will form, and you just leave it alone. So maybe just protection will just protect it. But actually, no, we're coming and bonking them on the head. We're doing all this constantly, this constant attrition of the biosphere. And all speakers now have spoken about how the destructive force is increasing. And I can tell you, and Vandana ji can definitely tell you, and anyone who's working with the land can tell you the tremendously regenerative power of the land. It is amazing. It is like it's like the human body. The regenerative power of the biosphere is immense, but not under assault like this, repetitive assault over centuries. And so how do we stop that? We cannot have a biosphere and eat it too. The two are mutually incompatible. This room should be, and we are large mammals, there should be trees here, there should be lianas here, there should be flowers here, there should be clean air, not air-conditioned air. And that is restoration ecology. So if you want to learn the details of planting, and there's so many young people here, that if you want to learn the details of how you can actually cultivate or protect or enhance biodiversity, please visit us. if you want to learn how to stop the system, not just delay its assault, because every day that this system is there, 200 species are going extinct. When they go extinct, they're gone forever. Every day that the industrial culture exists, 200 species are going extinct. And I'm saying, and I use the word extermination, they are being exterminated. So that means in a year, you have 50,000 species of plants and animals and bacteria and all the little creatures are being packed off. And so what is the biosphere going to come back with? So unless we have this parallel challenge to the system that is destroying our lives, all the beautiful things is like palliative care. You know, that's not how it should be. It should be a life that is beautiful, clean, diverse, abundant, fecund. You know, this is the language of tropical diversity. Coolness, food, just you walk out there and there's food, not out there into a mall. So restoration ecology has two sides to it: beautiful work, and then the back end of industrial civilization. How do we deal with it? Thank you.
I think yesterday some of you have heard Jairam Ramesh, saying, I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And then he added, unless we have a new tunnel. So typical politician, so he wants to shift maybe the game or the, or the ground on which you want to fight. I'll come to why I'm saying this. And then second, yesterday we had our chair saying, when the discussion was about common ground, so he said we need a new ground, maybe we need a new ground. So these two statements bring us into a discussion on the transformation which we are discussing. What kind of transformation we are looking at. So, when this new ground was mentioned, he said, he gave an example of vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So this kind of binary, I think it's going on, and as if there is no common ground, and especially when there is a technology involved. So right now we heard about motor boats versus canoes, and catamarans versus trawler boats versus factory ships. So and of course handloom versus power loom. Now we are looking at agriculture, conventional agriculture versus digital agriculture. So these are all technology binaries which are being pushed as if there is no common ground. But in fact, there is a wider and deeper story behind all of these. And fundamentally, we are seeing state taking a position supporting this new technology, subsidizing. Without state support, I don't think any of those alternatives, mainstreams can survive. So it could be any of them, what we have been discussing. So that I think we need to understand how state is taking a partisan role, and how we can bring state into maybe a neutral position, or a position where it does not take sides. I think that's one challenge which we need to look at. And in fact, in COP 26, 27, that's the other part I want to bring is, there is, since we are talking of reimagination, I see in COP 26 and 27, there is no imagination about the solutions. In fact, some people were very frustrated that there's no discussion on solutions which encompass a set of factors, a diversity of factors, and ultimately what you have seen is a loss and damage, which is more of a compromised position, and then this carbon capture technologies. So we are not seeing the entire range of solutions which should have emerged in COP 26 and 27. In fact, in the last 27 COPs, you'll be surprised that why that common ground has not emerged even today. And I'm not sure COP 28 can also lead us into any common ground. So I am just bringing back you to the issue is we are not imagining enough. And that's because we are not informed enough and we are not thinking enough. Now, I'll just to look at why of that. We are talking of transformation, but we know now that a lot of people have realized and recognized that this transformation does not happen without structural transformation. The structure which is supporting the current extractive economy, I think that has to be dismantled. And that dismantling can happen only apart from the struggles, apart from the wider knowledge, awareness, and people's struggles. In addition, we need to think of the institutional change, the institutional ecosystem which is required. Why I'm bringing all that is the argument of just a change in technology does not give us the alternative. So when we are talking of agroecology or natural farming, we usually talk about production shift from chemical-based farming to non-chemical farming, or some practices which do not bring in external inputs. I'm saying it's not that, because you are seeing now we are seeing that evolving structure. The same structure is has now accepted millets. So 2 years down the line, we can see the common people, common farmers may be dispossessed of millets as well. So I think unless that structural transformation is there, talking about just a production technology does not help. So that's where when Dr. Vandana Shiva is also talking about agroecology, it is also how agroecology dismantles the structures. So the seed monopolies which are controlling and which are widening their control in various other seeds and probably now millets. In fact, you might be surprised now there is research going on genetically modifying the millets as well. So this at Indian Institute of Millet Research. So how do you dismantle this seed monopolies, the structure which is supporting all this? So unless you do that, even if you talk agroecology in just a non-structural way, it does not give us the ultimate solution of diversity, equity, equality, and all those things. So three ideas I just want to bring it to your notice. It's also in the context of the lakes. Traditionally lakes were managed not by any institution, not by any authority. We talked about wetland authority, all those things. These are controlled by the norms, belief systems of the people. So there was no one person or there was no one address or a location which enabled this commons being used more equitably and and more diversity and sustainably. So these belief systems, can we bring back these belief systems? Because I know when we are talking of institutional landscape, today we have only companies, corporates, which are being pushed about as if that's a solution for every problem. So even in FPOs, in agriculture, even if they do agroecology as FPO, I'm sure I don't think they will bring back sustainability in the entire process. So we need an alternative which is not like A bringing A1 or A2, but we need something which is different, quite different. So there I am talking about this belief and social norm systems. And that, I think, agroecology has a potential to bring that. And second is, yesterday there was a discussion on Bangalore effect. I saw a video of some management guru from New York. She came to Bangalore and she went to some market, and there she visited a temple, and she saw some women, working with flowers, preparing garlands. And she took one garland and asked the lady how much I can pay. And that lady, it seems, she smiled and said, no money, don't want money. So this guru was telling her audience that it's not money which defines the relationships. I feel it's much more, because that person who refused money, it's more about a personality where she does not look at money as the key to her livelihood. This is a problem even in natural farming projects, in the transformative projects. Unless that farmer or the producer of food transforms into a personality where he or she does not look at money as the primary thing. So when we are talking of MSP, when we are talking of income, I think we need to look at how these kind of persons or personality can be built. So ultimately, because time is short, agroecology is a concept which transcends various spheres. It includes social, personal, economic, environment, and ecological spheres, and also governance spheres as well. So FAO gives us some 10 elements, but there are more elements in that. So I feel agroecology can be used as a tool to dismantle these institutional structures which are growing, and now new kind of structures are being laid through World Economic Forum talking about the Great Reset and the kind of institutional architecture they are talking about. So I'm stopping here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank ESG and congratulate ESG. What I'm going to argue today is, can we have environmental justice without health justice? And can we have health justice without fiscal justice? And I'm going to rely largely on Piketty's remarkable work, A Brief History of Equality. What Piketty shows us with solid data over time is that at the beginning of the 20th century, direct taxes amount to 10% of the economy of the UK and the USA and other Western countries. This went largely into military and colonial administration. After the carnage of the First World War and the establishment of the USSR, things changed dramatically in the UK and less dramatically in the US. This was also partly the influence of the Labour Party in the UK and the downgrading of the status of the House of Lords, and partly also due to communist influence in Parliament in the case of France, and above all, the emergence from the ashes of the Great War of the Soviet Union. Sidney and Beatrice Webb toured the Soviet Union, the first country in the world to provide universal and free health care, and this, of course, went on to influence the formation of the National Health Service when Labour won the majority in the first post-war elections that saw Churchill rejected in the UK. The proportion of direct taxes rose significantly then on till about 1980. Inheritance taxes were introduced. Along with wealth tax, this saw the proportion of direct taxes increase substantially to about 50 to 60% in most countries of Western Europe and indeed even the USA. This made possible investments in education and health that were the envy of other countries. It also made possible investments in public goods such as transport and communication, a minimum wage, old age, and unemployment benefits. In short, inequalities reduced, including income and wealth inequalities, and reflecting this, health inequalities. These societies became less unfair, as attested to by increase in heights among the working classes and the reduction in the gap in average life expectations. Nevertheless, as the Black Report indicates, there were persistent health inequalities by class. It was proportionate taxation, wealth tax, and inheritance tax that made social goods possible. Corporate taxation was a part of this package. This meant, of course, that the social responsibility for the next generation, the reproduction of labor, was socialized by social democratic movements in the West. In India, we have never crossed 10 to 11% of direct taxes. The proportion of indirect taxes far exceeds that of direct taxation paid for by the poor. This is not only grossly unfair, but goes towards subsidizing the rich in a variety of ways, as, for example, the public funding is used to cover private provisioning of healthcare through insurance. In the immediate post-Second World War period, there was also a decline in the transfer of wealth and resources from countries of the South to the North over this period. Nationalization of resources was often met with violent response from the West. The 1953 US and UK-led coup against the democratically elected government of Iran of Mohammad Mossadegh comes to mind after the nationalization of oil. Kwame Nkrumah was mysteriously assassinated after his government nationalized copper in 1962 in Ghana. The 11 September 1973 coup by the US against Allende for the nationalization of also comes to mind. Since 1980, however, as we all know, we have seen a reversal of these patterns of progressive taxation, and fiscal injustice has come home to stay. We can have no health justice with the rampant fiscal injustice we have. Income and wealth inequalities have increased around the world and in India. The Oxfam International Report, Inequality Kills, notes that the wealth of the 10 richest men has doubled, while incomes of 99% of humanity are worse off. Because of COVID, that 252 men have more wealth than all the 1 billion women and girls in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean combined. That since 1995, the top 1% has captured nearly 20 times more global wealth than the bottom 50% of humanity. Indeed, that inequality contributes to the death of at least one person every 4 seconds. In India, the top 10% of the population holds 77% of total national wealth. 73% of the wealth generated in 2017 went to the richest 1%, while 670 million, who comprise the poorest half of the population, saw only a 1% increase in their wealth. There are 119 billionaires in the country at present. Their number increased from only 9 in 2000 to 101 in 2019. The report also notes that 63 million Indians are pushed into poverty every year due to healthcare costs. These are not intractable facts of nature, but mutable and contingent facts of history and politics. It is politics which determines who lives and who dies and how. This is what should make health justice so very important on our political agenda. Thank you.
Hello, friends. I'll try to be quick. My name is Regi. My wife Lalita is sitting at the back. I'm a clinician, nothing to do with community health or anything what you are talking of, but I'll just try to go through the topic which I am allotted, which is health for all. And following Dr. Mohan Rao, health for all is quite impossible in the present circumstances because no political party currently or past is interested in health for all simply because they want the population to be unequal. It is not this thing. Health for all is not a new topic. It was coined in 1978 in Alma Ata a very idealistic society where 134 countries and 67 organizations came together to start from the definition of health to what health, to saying that primary healthcare is the key to health for all. Not only that, the Alma Ata Declaration was key in saying that health for all should not rest either in the hospitals or in primary health care, but also in the social determinants of health. And that shook the capitalist world, because nobody wanted health, the social determinants, the determinants of health to be included with health. Now, social determinants are the economy, roads, water, food. And they said, no, this is not possible. And within 5 years, the capitalist economy bulldozed WHO into saying that this is impracticable, because it was health for all by 2000, by year 2000, that is impracticable. And second is that this is not a workable solution. You cannot include other things like, for example, food or roads or water into health. And then they made health planning into silos, saying that let's have a national tuberculosis program, let's have a national nutrition program, let's have this thing, but nothing to do with social determinants of health. Now, I come from an organization called Tribal Health Initiative. Me and my wife Lalita work with the indigenous community in Sithalingi in Tamil Nadu. We are in a forested area, and one of the things which we excited us a lot was this health for all. Can we bring health for all? And in indigenous communities where there are no roads and there are no water and food, it was a big challenge. And one of the things we said is that, can health be taken up by the people themselves? As clinicians, we knew nothing about community health, and all the community health and development we learned was from the people of Sithalingi, who in their, with much patience, taught us what health was and how to tackle that. So we have a basic hospital. We started off with the basic hospital, but basically we started off with training locals, tribal women and tribal girls in health. And our biggest challenge when we went there in 1993 was an infant mortality of 147, and lots of mothers dying in childbirth. With the community, with 10 years, we brought that down to below Tamil Nadu levels, when Tamil Nadu is one of the most progressive states in health. And then we realized that actually communities can take up responsibilities for their health. And when we started talking to people, they said, yes, we have a hospital, no mothers are dying, but what about our food? What about our economy? And along with them, we sat down and started talking and working with them. We put our hands into organic agriculture, because organic is what is healthy. We built up a farmers cooperative of about 700 farmers. We built up the economy with women's cooperatives. We have artisans guilds. And with the building of the economy, the whole health situation started changing. People started coming forward for treatment. What we cannot do, they will say, even if you refer to Salem, which is our nearest city, they will say, it's no problem, we have the money, we will go. They would never say that before. And that is when, as a doctor, I realized how much the economy means to health. And taking this further, we ran into a drought situation where we had to do a lot of watershed management. And watershed management, who has the money? The government, the panchayats have the money. And the panchayats wouldn't budge, because money, you know what happens to money in the panchayats, no? It goes down to the president's pocket. So we started a mass movement of sensitizing people for going to Gram Sabhas and demanding what is happening to our money. And the government got upset, and so they started sabotaging all our meetings. And in 2019, the panchayat elections came, and our farmers collective said that we are going to stand for the elections. They stood, they won. And then we realized how much governance means to health. And when governance came to the farmers cooperative, which is an apolitical organization, We started having roads to all the villages. We started having water to all the villages. We started having power to all the villages. There are villages in our panchayat which is getting electricity, roads and water after 75 years of independence. But that is because the government was with the people and the government was not with the political parties. So what does health mean? Health means all this. Health doesn't mean running a hospital. Health doesn't mean running a community health program. Health also means food, also means economy, also means governance. So if health for all has to take place in our country, it has to come from a mass movement of the people at a micro level. It can never happen at a macro level because our politicians are not interested in health for all. Thank you.
So as a coordinator or maybe chair of this session, do not want to sum up the discussion, but I just want to add a few points to them. They've been phenomenal presentations and the discussions that have been made. Who served the city as the directly elected deputy mayor of Simla from 2012 to 17, and then worked in the urban field since 2017. Small anecdotal experiences I want to just bring out, when we talk about reflexive democracy. I mean, we know the kind of democracy we are living in. It's more of a ruler-ruled state than what you were saying, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, where we just reimagine, kind of citizen partnership. Now we call resident partnership, not even citizenry is that important for us. But, this journey right from Mohenjo-daro, then we have the Hindu cities, the Mughal period, the Rajput cities, then the civil and the military cantonment of the British that we've seen, because I come from Simla as a British town. And of course, then the Nehruvian period, post-1947, and of course the post-neoliberal 1990s, and we have the Amrit Kal since 2014. So I think this is a very interesting transformation, but if reflexive democracy, I think if that is the crux, then we are too far from that. And the kind of, because we are already 50% urban in Asia, more than 50% people live in the cities. India is already 34%, maybe 40%, so I'll try to share some of my experiences there. And I remember because when we were reviewing the in the National Task Force, reviewing the 74th Constitutional Amendment, one of the important elements of participatory democracy that was brought out, and K.C. Sivaramakrishnan, who was the chair of that committee, in fact, who brought this, what would be a democracy if, say, as far as the local bodies are concerned. So we have this interesting 74th Constitutional Amendment where it was said that some 18 subjects should be transferred to the cities. And so this Casey very vehemently remarked, Tikender, what is the smart city model? Because that's the new model of governance in the cities. I said, sir, tell me what it is. He said, like writing an obituary of the 74th Constitutional Amendment. So I think there's a lot needs to be done, and the kind of scale that you've drawn, right from agroecology, from environment, I think it goes beyond the capacity and the space that we are looking at. So I would like here to draw, and then I also want to quote the Chief Election Commissioner, who just recently, before announcing the Karnataka elections, he said there is urban apathy. So not even 50% people vote in Bangalore, and for that matter in urban centers. And of course, we know the reason for urban apathy, the huge amount of alienation that has taken place in the whole process of urbanization, the whole process of urban governance. Prem Chandrabhakkar is here, so he was our leader. We were fighting against the Central Vista in Delhi. And we know the kind of processes that are undergoing in this whole gamut of re-envisioning or revitalizing democracy in the urban centers. So I think so the two philosophers that I want to quote here. The first is Dr. Ambedkar, and when he says democracy for the people, by the people, and of the people, I think that question of the people is completely missing. Where is of the people? So of the people doesn't just mean the election, the narrative that is being created. Okay, you win the election and then you just subjugate everything to your ideas and you say, look, we have got the mandate and we know how these elections are being won. So I think it is beyond that, and it is the whole process that I'm talking about the city development process, about city planning, and that's what Prem Samuelstein writes in one of his very interesting works. When who plans for whom? Nowhere in the country, forget about the citizens. I'm not even talking about, your reflexive democracy. The citizens are nowhere. Dunu is just gone because we did a long series of 5 episodes on the Delhi Master Plan. This transformation that has taken place in Delhi from the 1951 to the 2041 Delhi Master Plan, where citizens are completely at bay. But forget about the cities. I'm talking about even the elected city governments. Nowhere in the country is the planning process under the due process of democratic institutions. So who plans for whom? It's the parastatals. The Delhi Development Authority plans for Delhi. Mumbai Development Authority plans for Mumbai. And then likewise you have the Greater Mohali Area Development Authority plans for. Now there are very funny, interesting anecdotes that I want to share. Who are these planners? Most of these planners are guided by big consultants from PwC, from Ernst Young, from all that. And all that they have offered right since 1990s is that, look, you do not know how to govern a city. We will tell you how to govern a city. We will draw your plans. We will tell you how the city is to be run, particularly after 1990s. And all that they have been planning is a technocentric, capital-intensive solution for the cities. Let me share some of very interesting anecdotes from Simla when I joined as a deputy mayor. So the first file that came to my office was the city mobility plan and the city sanitation plan. And you will not believe me that both these plans were like completely divergent to each other, in the sense that both these plans, now they are asking for a metro in Simla. That's the comprehensive mobility plan. In a city sanitation plan, instead of decentralized waste management, they are asking for a capital-intensive waste-to-energy plants. That's the push that is taking place from the top. So when we talk about cities, I think it's like all a consultant-driven model that has to be revisited. Now, how do we go back? How do we just reclaim those spaces? I think that's an interesting question, what we try to do in Delhi Master Plan and what we need to do. And it's not just the loss of equity. It's not just the loss of reclaiming the right, but it's the loss of urban commons. Just look at the way how Gurgaon has been planned. Look at the way how Noida has been planned. It's completely obfuscating. So I think the right to the city, what Lefebvre points out, needs to be revisited in the current context. And what does this plan? I mean, that's what I have always been arguing against the planners. I mean, and Samuelstein says, look, we are not dishonest. It's the system. So it's basically a systemic crisis that makes us corrupt. So instead of what our professors were saying, instead of primary health centers, what you find in this plan is super speciality, multi-speciality hospital like you have in Gurgaon. In Gurgaon, you do not have a single primary health center, but you have the Medanta. And who all can go to Likewise, you do not have a playground in the plan, but you have big stadiums. I think these are not the desired ways in which democracy can sustain. And lastly, I mean, before I just hand over this session, ask the audience to respond to the questions. What is the structure, Leo, that we are looking at? Is it too decentralized? How do we, we know, we are comprehending the reality, okay? So restoration is what you've argued for. But how do we do that? What kind of structures? Is it just people's structures? Because we've seen some of those people's plan taking place in Kerala. Now, Kerala is doing something phenomenally because they are forming an urban commission, Prem, just let me apprise you. And what they are arguing for is no industrialization in their cities. I don't know how prudent that is, but that is what they have been arguing for. Or what kind of models do we experiment with? Because we've seen people's collectives. I myself, before being the deputy mayor, I was the state president of the Kisan Sabha. So how do we structure it? How to visualize it? If you were to ask me, what kind of democracy are we looking at? I think here I would like to revisit, like I was read Ambedkar, Marx once again, and where Marx speaks about restitution, not just restoration. And Koi Saito, one of the philosophers from, I mean, it's of course a philosophical angle. The Japanese philosopher has brought this to the fore. I mean, he's written a phenomenal work on Marx's eco-socialism, where he brings out this connection how capital actually robs the people from its natural organic relationship to nature, and how it commoditifies nature into, commodity and makes it a saleable product. Now, there he brings in an equation, which is a very interesting equation, what Marx writes in Capital One, that the struggle against inequality is equal to the struggle against capitalism, which equals to struggle for naturalism. So he brings in this whole concept of liberation of the collective to the liberation of an individual. Because what kind of structures are we talking about? I think, because it's just a provocation that I wanted to make. And lastly, Leo, it's extremely political. It's a systemic problem. And why I say it's extremely political? Because I was there in the Paris climate talks as a city's representative, because I was serving as the deputy mayor. And when Trump walked out, when US walked out, all of us said, now what is the use of Paris climate talks? And I remember Applebaum, who was the mayor of Colorado, he said, Tikender, don't worry, we are running the cities. He meant this, the Democrats are running the city governments, most of the city governments in US. We will go back and mobilize the opinion. And you know what happened? They defeated Trump, they brought the new Green Deal, we know how green that is. But at the same time, we find in England the Labour Party championing a cause. They're saying, of course, they didn't win on that agenda, and saying that, look, those who do not adhere to the principles of green ecology will not even be allowed to trade in the stock exchange. Though that sounds quite extremist. Is that kind of political churning taking place in India? I think I have elections to the Shimla Municipal Corporation, and I feel, for heaven's sake, don't use flex. None of them have adhered to that. Everyone is using flex, and flex is the worst biodegradable material as far as Himalayas are concerned. So I think it's just a provocation for the audience, because the speakers are here, you have to ask those questions. But I think it's a very interesting time where you have the Man Ki Baat, the ruler-ruled concept, they have the narrative, but at the same time, we have the people, we have the argument, we have science, and that belligerence of science, with all the historical evolutionary process that we have passed through, I think we can defeat them. And we can defeat for a more secular future, the future that belongs to us. I think, and then to the questions. Thank you.
This is a question to Professor Robert John Chandran. How to input or mandate essential ecologically wise choices in governmental policy making, either at the state or at the central government level? Any thoughts on that?
So you're talking about policies at the state. Well, I think there's a lot of progressive legislation driven by communities, right? Civil society groups, scientists, academicians, all argued for progressive legislation on the environment. And that is the only way forward, I see, from people's movements to scientific knowledge and inputs that can contribute to, enhancing environmental laws, making them more capable of dealing with new scenarios. And I think the courts can play a role. I actually want to ask Justice a question about some judicial activism and interventions from the court that can, propel people's movements forward to demand for better legislation, better governance at the environmental scale. So it has to be bottom up, because it's not going to come down, as I agree with Regi was saying about, politicians don't really care. So the corporate lobbies and others would naturally push in the opposite direction to mobilize, the natural environment for productive, profit-oriented things. And we are seeing that Mr. Jairam Ramesh mentioned how many of the laws are being diluted to enable, these things, like palm oil plantations and opening up forests. Like even the National Green India Mission is a way to actually mobilize resources take it away from communities. So the only way forward is for communities to keep, engaging and understanding the changes that are coming, and use movements, and as a probably a last resort to use the courts to get relief and I think legislation is important.
One is trying to understand what's in the roots or what's the common denominator for all that we are discussing. Definitely one of the key words is consumption. And then of course we can talk of extraction and we can talk of many other words. I got prompted to say, because just now you mentioned about some Japanese philosophy. You said the collective can be transformed if the individuals transform. Something like that you said. Who's the philosopher who said that?
Sorry? No, the Japanese philosopher is Koi Saito.
Koi Saito.
Koi Saito, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's not a Japanese proverb, it's a Marxian proverb.
Oh, is it Marx?
Yeah, he quotes Marx in that from Capital One, Volume 1.
Okay. Maybe I mistook it. I mistook it. You know, once we were discussing about this whole thing about manufacturing happening around the whole world, and why is there so much manufacturing? And if we know how the world energy is being consumed, most of it is going for, let's say, manufacturing, one among the common denominators. And what does manufacturing do? It makes, let us say, very simple, it makes. And why does it make? Because we take. If there are no takers, there will be no makers. Whatever could be the government support, whatever could be the kind of international policies, whatever could be corporatization we're talking about, if there are no takers, there will be no makers. There will be no consumption if there is transformation. So all this extraction we are talking about, why is this extraction happening? Because there is consumption. Who is consuming? We are the consumers. You and I are the consumers. And what are we consuming? We are consuming everything. Even the seminar is also a mode of consumption. Why am I here? Because I think I get something out of it. And what are we consuming for? We can have various names. Maybe we are chasing comforts, we are chasing name, we are chasing power, we are chasing, there are many things we chase. So there is this whole culture of consumption, this whole culture of taking. And that's what is making everything do. And if we individually transform, will all this happen? Maybe yes, maybe no. No? I can see all of you are experts in your individual subject domains. When Gandhiji used the word non-cooperation, just imagine a simple word. I know it's a kind of a philosophical ideal which will never happen. Gandhiji used the word non-cooperation. And imagine a word called non-consumption. What will happen? Any of you want to react, please?
Do you want to react? Yeah.
The fact of the militaries being the world's largest users, single entity users of all the resources on the planet, is what is destroying the planet, in my opinion, from what I've understood. It is not the individual consumptions of all of us. So there is a different problem from all of us being consumers, and we've gone from citizenship to consumer culture. There is a problem there. But the militaries alone, what their impact is on all the planetary boundaries alone, and that's why they walk out of the COP meetings, and so they don't turn up for any of these, the US. How do we embrace, how do we understand that, our role versus the military in the carbon footprint of humankind?
No, I just want to say it's not true that because there are consumers, there are makers. In fact, if you take textiles, what is produced and what is consumed is there's a lot of difference. Only 30% of the textiles are used. So I don't think that's a straight line equation. But we take the point, consumption is a big problem. And then you are missing the entire marketing infrastructure which pushes us into consumption. And how children, how youth are pushed into consumption. We know the mobiles and all those things. So I don't think there is a straight line problem that because you have consumers, we have makers. So there is a economy which of course, we know extractive economy, but the economy of overconsumption is also there. So that's why I think we need to look at issues more deeply.
In the book Small is Beautiful by Ernest Schumacher, he talks about something called as adopting intermediate technology. So he says that it will increase decentralization and prevent urbanization and all the other related issues that come along with urbanization. So he said this exactly 50 years back. So what is your take on that, and do you think it will address today's challenges?
I think what Shoemaker wrote at that point in time is not particularly relevant today, because today's globalization is led by finance. Financial institutions are the major, just take the question of health now. It is investment coming in not just from the World Bank, but also hedge funds and so on. So it's dramatically altered the nature of what kind of technologies, what kind of problems we are attending to.
I thought that the previous two questions were kind of related. This question, I think, beats us all. As apex evolutionary beings, are we hardwired to destroy each other and the world? I mean, there's quite a bit of theory around it, and consumption would be one mode of doing it, overconsumption. But then this whole thing about nationalism and political boundaries, which go beyond the understanding of planet as interrelated, is actually stands in direct opposition to our evolutionary thoughts of nationalism. Now, consumption is related to GDP, GDP is related to power, power is related to superpower, and the competition that we have at the global level. Is there an alternate way? Is there another way of organizing the world and the relationship that we have between us? Can we, for example, as panelists sit here in front of 16 panels, flat panels, consuming probably 3,000 watts, 4 hours, or for 2 days or 3 days, and forever as long as this lasts, and answer these questions? How have we normalized it? This is definitely, I think all of us go through it personally, but then this is also an issue of governance and policy making.
So one last question. So this is kind of summing up, and this question goes to many of you. So we were talking about the fisheries and then the salt, the lakes and freshwater lakes and things like that. Then there are estuaries, and then the policies are around things which come to as economy. So what about the smaller things that are there where economy is not concerned? Like she was talking about mosses, and I'm talking about insects and the reptiles that are there in these zones, which is not directly part of the major policy making, but is really important for the biodiversity and the pyramid that we are all part of as apex consumers, let's say. And then it also boils down to the policy making, and then the current policies, and then there are many policies that are being ripped apart, and then there are new policies that are being made which are neo-capitalist. So where are these the voiceless, the powerless side of it being represented? We are talking about macro, and there's so much of work happening in the macro, but what about the micro? How do we bring a balance of that in the representation as well?
Trying to stop the motorboats, the inland waterway, was that when the project was cleared, and we were also looking at the concept note of when they cleared at the Ministry of Shipping, they were not at all concerned about the birds. Like, there was no mention of the birds, and we think the birds are really important in the lake, because we know where they lay eggs, where they sleep at night, what they eat from the lakes, all of that. So we raised this issue, and then suddenly this thing opened up, that you cannot just bring in a project. Of course, I'm not talking about the policy, because it'll take a long time to get all these things on board, but in terms of trying to argue against one particular project, and we bring these elements from the ground and try to use it as one that protests. And we said the Kenos are much more sensitive to the system, and we definitely care about the birds, and because that's important for and how they birds are also important for not just the people there, but for the ecosystem as a whole, and the local people understand that. And that's really critical. In fact, the most part, I think, in fact, I would really like to hear on how you're looking at the moss and policy work.
I'm so glad mosses are being sent to the center. So I have several thoughts in my head. One is that if representation means monetization, I have a serious problem with it. If everything is being converted to cash and therefore we protect it, there's a big, big problem there. That I protect mosses because they're going to get me some cash at the end of the day I don't think communities function that way. But if a community can protect a whole forest, and the forest is composed of so many beings, and the vitality of the forest is connected to your vitality, which is health, community health, children's health, mental health, social health, fabric of the world, of their world, that I think attending to, recognizing, conversing, noting has to be part of our daily conversation in any circle of people. And if that is not there, just a representation, I don't think will capture the integrity and complexity of a biome, for instance. So I'm not going to just pitch the mosses. Then they're shifting elephants from Arunachal to Gujarat. They're going to start shifting mosses from Western Ghats to Bangalore and make Bangalore. So there's a problem there. And how do we create diverse, healthy, supportive, community-based actions, which then people represent for themselves in their own place? And then whether it gets to the center of power is a different thing.
One example is, seed. In seeds, now there is a lot of efforts going on how women had knowledge. Traditionally they used to control seeds. They had knowledge and skill of saving seeds and maintaining the quality, selecting and reusing and sharing, all that. So the entire system was controlled by women, and that too from Dalit families. So yesterday was Sheila mentioned the episteme, universalizing the episteme, the knowledge, the skill, and the practices. So unless these come into the policies, so that's where we are talking of a Seed Act which recognizes this, the entire system. So that's where the struggle is. So once that Seed Act comes, I think the women will become mainstream in that.
Just before we leave for lunch, I request Amrita and Harsh to just honor all the panelists with our ESG goodie bags. Thank you, everyone. We'll start the afternoon session at 2:20. Thank you, everyone.